So where do the SS3000s fit into that then, Kev?
Okay, so I've got the Amorphis and I've moved on to Harefield, which was for me a baptism of fire. I'm an Essex boy, you know. It's rare to find a 10-acre lake in Essex, you know, let alone one of 40. And I always said the only bars in Essex sell Fosters. You know, so I'm on this, for me, huge pit by my standards with, like, you know, bars everywhere. You know, it was a completely different environment I was used to. And say I was a close-up angler, and these boys are, you know, are whacking out over these bars, you know, to the middle, blah blah, using really fine line. And the success rate of landing was, I always used to say, there's 3 bars basically going out over Harefield. I used to say if you went over the first bar, you'd land 7 out of 10. Second bar, maybe 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 2 out of 10. The third bar, basically 0 or 1. Yeah, and I've always believed that you don't put a bait in there unless you've got a reasonable chance of landing it. You know, I don't leave tackle in carp. And so I was trying to fish Harefield short range, but the fact is at the time, a lot of the time, those fish lived in the middle. They was kind of weird, you know, they'd live in the middle and then they do a round of the lake, you know, and you know, like this, you know, I was used to say it's like wildebeest, you know, they go on the march, they do a lap of the lake, get caught and then go back and live in the middle. So I thought, this isn't about casting to the middle, this is about casting a heavy line to the middle to limit the cut-offs as much as I could. So I started looking at sea reels. Shimano had just brought out the Biomasters and I got a set of those. And the first time I used them on Harefield, I'll never forget, you know, people walking around, wow, Kev, what you got on your rods, buckets? You know, we're talking about, you know, we've gone from spools like this and like this thick to me using spools like this and like that, you know. And so, but the point was, I wasn't trying to cast further, I was trying to cast heavy line further, you know, and, but I work for Dara, I've got the Amorphis, and I didn't want to be seen using you know, a competitor's reels. And anyway, cut long story short, I saw a Dara Japanese catalogue for product just for Japan, and I flicked through it and I saw the SS3000s and 9000s, and I thought it looked perfect. So I asked John Middleton to bring me some in, and yeah, he did, you know, so, and that's how the SS3000 became popularised. And it was also the start of controlling the bait runner from the front, if you like, you know, because everyone was using bait runners by then. You know, Shimano smashed it with the bait runner, and everyone was using bait runners. But of course, there's no bait run on a, you know, on a big sea reel, so you know, I had to, you know, wind the drag in quick, use a spool as the bait. Use a spool in the front, drag as a bait runner device, and of course when you hit it, you just wind the drag up quick, which wasn't so much of a hardship, because as I say, there's a long way out, so by the time you know, say that was easy, but that started that, and then the quick drags come from that. I've made my first quick drag knob, I think, in 1989. It's like a cam thing. I've still got them, I think.
And that's the engineering background?
That's the engineering background, yeah.
What was it like, Kev? You mentioned coming from Essex, that Colne Valley scene was in full swing. Can you paint us a bit of a picture about what it was like what was the epicentre of the Colne Valley culture at the time?
The barge at Harefield, as simple as that. It was an incredible time in carp fishing. You know, the Colne Valley was the place to be. You know, it had incredible carp waters with average size of carp or larger carp than, you know, most of the country. You know, say when Savay first hit the scene, you know, Rod Hutchinson's writings and that, it was wow. You know, I've often said actually that it's not anglers that it's not through angling you become famous, it's through waters you become famous. You know, and anglers who walked on Savay, you know, in essence, a huge pit full of very large, naive carp. You know, and so a lot of people made their name on Savay, and it's no, I'm not saying this with disrespect, but you know, take Albert Romp for example. He ended up writing a carp book, but until he went to Savay, he'd never even caught a 20. You know, and I'm not sure he fished many other places. You know, but yeah, you had that, the fisheries. Too many waters to mention. So anyone who was anyone, you know, was migrating to the Colne Valley. I was late and missed the Savay thing because I was getting the business off the ground. Then there wasn't the M25, and so the only way through London was you know, literally going through. The only way to get to the other side of London was going through London, and I just couldn't justify that enormous travel time because I had a full-time job. Plus, I was getting the business down. You know, Rod was staying with me as a lodger when Savay come up and he joined. So, no doubt I could have, you know, got in on that, but I just had to turn me back. It was only when the M25 opened that Colne Valley became an option for me. So it was 1988 when I joined Harefield, and Savay had been well established then. In fact, I couldn't get on Savay. Brock's up made it quite clear that he weren't going to have me. I think I was considered a bit of a renegade, and that's really what happened on Harefield. Yeah, we once had sweatshirts done, the Harefield Renegades. Yeah, all the up and coming kids. Who weren't considered the old guard who are now all on Savay. So it was basically dead man's shoes then. They was all sitting on Savay, so us rebels, us young rebels, louts, whatever, we was all opposite side of the road of Harefield. And in the middle is a barge pub, which become the epicentre of life in the Colne Valley. But I think I've said it, 1988 was probably my least successful carp year. My least successful year in catching carp, but it was probably one of the most enjoyable years carp fishing, inverting commas, I've ever had. And I'm not afraid, I'm ashamed of that. I had a great time. It was just a party, every weekend. We'd arrive on a Friday afternoon, you walk round to your swim, get your gear set up, you go to a Horse and Barge for a few pints, then you go on to the Indian in Harefield, you'd roll back to the lake about 2 o'clock in the morning, do a pub cast, then wake up around 8, 9, wind your rods in, go up the calf for breakfast, then you go straight from the calf to the Horse and Barge for a pint at lunchtime, then you go back to the lake at say 3, chuck the rods out and snooze until 6 when you get changed. And I'll say that, we used to take our best clothes up there and get changed for the Saturday night. Sadly, the calf wasn't open on Sunday morning, so we trooped down to Farlow's, come back from Farlow's, pack up, go to the Horse and Barge for a pint and drive home. Hardly going to catch you many carp, is it? But the guys on the syndicate, it just all gelled that year. Just loads of great up and coming carp anglers, all were on there that year. Me, Zen and Boko, Phil Harper, made him come over after, I think at the end of that first year after he got chucked off of Savay. The list is too long to mention. It was a hotbed of the up and coming carp anglers, and although I wasn't, if you like, focusing on the carp fishing, my engineering mind was fascinated by these new challenges. Like I said, I sorted out the best way I could to avoid the line cut-offs, but of course we've still got line cut-offs, over those bars, and that's when I come up with the break-off lead concept. That as soon as the fish hit the rig, the lead would come off the line, and thus the fish would rise in the water. I knew that, I won't bore you, by something I did in the way back in the 70s, that if you took the lead off the line, the fish were forced to rise up in the water. And that was the thing that massively changed the catch rate at Savay. The following year, I had a big dispute with Dougal, the head bailiff. You know, we all have our little periods in life. Dougal is a fantastic friend of mine now, I love him to bits, but in that point in his life it was a bad time for him, and I got caught up in that. I said to Rob Maley one day, you know, I'm coming back there, I'm going to front him, and Rob just said, don't. So I stayed away, but Essex John Watson, good mate of mine, I'd fished alongside him over there, and I'd shown him, you know, this break-off lead rig, and he went on, I think, to rip Harefield apart that year. I think he landed over 40 fish, but the key point is he didn't lose hardly any. You know, if you'd hooked 10 carp on Harefield, you'd have been lucky to have landed 4 of them. You know, it was never about takes, it was about converting them. You know, so that's just one of the examples of how I become incredibly innovative. It was probably the most innovative period of my life. Well, it was the start of it. From there to the early 90s, because when I left Harefield, you know, I had all this stuff I'd developed at Harefield, and then soon after that, I watched the carp feeding and realised, you know, they was blowing the how they was blowing the rigs out. You know, so that started the blowback rig. You know, and then I hit on crumb and PVA bags, you know, which weren't being really used then, and yeah, I had this awesome edge really over other anglers. I could go anywhere, you know, and
is it a matter of some regret that, given the edges you had, you possibly didn't have time to take them to the waters that were at the very, you know, many of the waters that were at the top of the tree in that period? Because I guess through the 90s the business would have become a bit of a monster and cut your fishing time.
Yes, you know, it always was, and I had to select waters that suited me. You know, the fact is most of my fishing is done with in Essex, because, you know, I didn't, as you pointed out, have time to do long drives. You know, the only one I did do and manage was Warmwell. You know, that was, I've become obsessed with catching herman, but that was like a 4-hour drive, so I got round that by working solidly, you know, 3 weeks, and then having a month down there, you know, using all my holidays up and things like that. But
the fish that
one thing through engineering is the engineering background I had. There was an element of time and motion study, which means, you know, making the most of your time, you know, being as efficient as possible, you know. And so, for example, I looked at bluebell, you know, much later on. I really fancied, you know, going after Benson, because every common I went after died on me. You know, snake pit common, ermine. You know, for God's sake, what is it about commons? You know, so I really wanted that big common, and I really fancied Benson. But so I went up there for a week just to do a recce on it, but I just didn't realise how out of the way. You know, I can't remember. It's something like a 2.5 or 2.5 hour drive here without traffic, and so reluctantly I just turned my back on it, because, you know, I'm looking for water where I can do 2 or 3 midweek nights, you know, and be back in the office, you know. So I reluctantly turned my back on it because, you know, it wasn't right for me, and I just couldn't efficiently fish it.
Knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently at either Warmwell or Snake Pit that might have seen those two that slipped through your fingers see the inside of the net?
Snake Pit, no. I just, you know, learnt their habits eventually, and I don't know how well it's known. I did actually lose the Snake Pit common one night through sloppy angling, basically, and then I got chucked off anyway. I seem to have a history of getting chucked off, don't I? But you know, then I lost the opportunity to catch it because I got chucked off over the Great Crested Newt incident. But Herman, absolutely right. when I went down to Warnwell, it was almost like there was two types of angler down there. Those who wanted to have sex with me and those that wanted to stick a knife in my back. I realised that I'd been protected from the day ticket type angler, the guys coming into carp fishing, as they were, looking at waters like that. I was on the elite circuit waters, where there was a certain respect and the way in those days, not now, but as I say, the way you behaved on these waters. All that rule book, I realised that Warnwell had been torn up, and as I say, it's how it is today on so many waters. But I had, shall we say, issues down there, and I was getting really pissed off with a lot of them. So I went on a mission to show them, and I was going to slaughter it, and I did. I had over 100 carp out of Warnwell, so I must have had a number of repeat captures, because I guess there was probably only 30 carp in there. But I absolutely hammered it that first year. But in my ego, I hammered it that first year, and Herman was caught 3 times from swims I'd vacated. Talk about bad luck. 3 times I left the lake, had to go home, and then Herman come out within 24 hours. I was so unlucky, talk about luck. Mm-hmm. Then I sat there and thought, this isn't bad luck. People used to have a dig at Warnwell because Herman and Bertha, regularly came out to women and kids. It was a factor. Women, kids, and in my case, after I'd left the lake. And I was thinking about it and thinking this is too much to be coincidence. And in short, I learned there's a big difference between carp fishing and specimen hunting for carp. It's an entirely different approach if you want to target big fish. And where I'd gone wrong at Warnwell was his ego to smash it. So heavily baiting, heavily attracting the hooligans, as I call them, where the fact is those big old fat girls like Herman would never ever compete with a group of carp. They just sit there until they bugger off and then pick up the crumbs. And so it's like fat people. With respect, it's like fat people. They've only got to look at food and they put on weight. And those big old carp are no different. They don't need much to keep them going. Mm-hmm. But what they don't want to do is compete, with a load of young aggressive fish. So techniques we now know, like fishing off the baited area. It taught me that consistently catching big fish needs a completely different approach from carp fishing. Say it's about subtlety, traps and everything. For example, I've never been a user of liquids, to overpower me, me ground baits and all that. I keep it really subtle, really small. And I've moved on a long time. I think it was probably by 2005, one of my proudest achievements, I said then, was catching 7 UK 40s in under 45 minutes of arriving at waters. Mm-hmm. And that was by hunting and using real subtle traps.